every time I remember summertime in my little village, all that comes to my mind is the long hot days of summer followed by sleepless nights. While as a teacher, I always looked forward to the summer vacations. The summer before the junior year was no vacation at all. It was the summer I saw a ghost in my own house, though I did not know it then. But after the sudden change of events, I had to find a new home, a small 2-bedroom house a few blocks from the central business district. This was a very old house, but it was quite beautiful with steep stairs, wooden doors, and antique handles and knobs on the doors. Looking forward to bringing it to life, and decorating it with vintage yet comfortable furniture and little tokens. I had no idea it had a resident, or rather inhabitants, already. The first lapse in their wonderful service happened on a rather hot summer evening. I was awake in bed with blurred vision, aching to get some sleep in the hot weather. The window in my bedroom was intact with a slight anticipation of getting a breath of fresh air, only that the surrounding was devoid of it. I was waking up several times during the night, and every time I tried to go back to sleep, I heard a cracking noise originating from the outside of the door to my room. I attributed it to the house making some sounds as if it was adjusting itself. Still, I had a creepy feeling. The next morning, I turned up the kitchen window to open without my knowledge. I must have locked it before going to bed last night, or at least I thought I did. Consequently, I dismissed it and justified myself. Possibly I forgot all about it. That night, I made sure to check all the windows and doors, making sure that all doors and windows were closed and locked before retiring to bed. Yet the noises persisted, which put me into a fix again despite taking all measures to ensure it did not happen again. The sound of footsteps in the hallway could faintly be heard, but they were clear and sharp. Every time I heard them, I developed a feeling of fear in my chest, but whenever I gathered the courage to check them, there was nothing. There was no burglar, no misplaced jewel, nothing which pointed definitely to a break-in other than that creepy feeling of always being followed. 10 years in this house, and one night while I lay in bed, the pounding became louder somehow. It was chilling. They got down right outside my bedroom door. Clasping my hands together tightly, I look at the door, waiting and praying it will open. However, the handle slowly turned. A chill ran down my spine, sweat breaking out on my forehead as I sat up. My heart was beating wildly. The door did not open, but there was movement around the handle, as if there was something on the other side of the door turning the handle to check it. I picked up my phone and called my dearest friend, Lisa. His voice was shaky, but he spoke softly about what he was afraid of. She sluggardly answered with her groggy voice. She asked me if I could spend a few days in her home, to which I did not take long to agree. The house seemed to close in on me, and I hurried out with a bag packed in record time. I found a sympathetic friend in Lisa, and she provided me with a friendly environment free from the terror at home. For a few nights, it was quiet, and I didn't hear the scary noises or feel the unpleasant presence of an intruder. Yet there exists a small voice in my heart that I must confront whatever was in my house. I went back home, and at my heels was Lisa. I was fully determined to get back home. And for some reason, she proposed to conduct a cleaning ritual to eliminate all bad energy in the house. With this and lots of determination, we lit sage and chanted prayers as we went around every room in the house. This smell was familiar, yet unfamiliar at the same time because thick smoke began to rise throughout the house. We got to my bedroom and the air became tense. The atmosphere became heavier. The coldness was painfully felt. Lisa's voice trembled as she went on with the ritual, but we proceeded with what had to be done. Just then there was a loud explosion, which seemed to be coming from the hall outside. I gulped, looking into his eyes before both of us stared blankly, our eyes opened wide in shock. "Hold your horses," I muttered to Lisa, trying hard to steady my voice. I opened the door and moved into the hallway. My adrenaline levels were pumped up. The hall was equally deserted, however. The sense of being followed grew stronger. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and said, "My lord," loud and clear though I was trembling inside. "It would strike everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what they want. You're not wanted here. Get out of my home." The atmosphere appeared to be charged, and for a moment the wind swept through the hallway, putting out the sage. I did not budge an inch, retracing my steps as I held my ground. Gradually the pressure was eased and the disturbing atmosphere of the house receded. With each movement that was carried out according to a ritual, I felt the level of tension gradually decrease, and finally, Lisa and I completed the rite. As we said this at the end, we felt that something which seemed to cling to the house had been lifted. I finally slept well the following night for the first time in weeks. The weird incidents did not reoccur, and my house restored its beauty of being a peaceful home. But the sweet memory of the unseen entity that was lurking somewhere in the dark remained implanted in my mind, though. Cracks on the floor, a noisy window, or a draft of wind told me of the horror that was cordially welcomed in my house that summer. Yet when I ne'er its face beheld, I conscious still of its shape. Every summer, I used to join my friends for the annual camping trip that we used to take. A tradition that was done since high school and lasted into our adulthood. This summer specifically, we planned on going to the wilderness to set up a camp that would be quite a distance away from any sign of society's influence. It was all planned for a weekend to be spent fishing, hiking, and telling stories around the campfire. We set the camp on a Friday afternoon, and the sun was out and with white rays in the sky. The place for camping was ideal. An open field covered by large trees and a natural spring source in a lake only about 20 minutes hike from the camping site. We pitched the camp, looked for firewood, and spent the night as we recounted our previous experiences in the field. As night fell, we lit a campfire and settled in for our favorite part of the trip. Ghost stories are folklore narratives that are relayed in whichever social gathering in which they may appear. The 8 of us engaged in telling ghost stories to each other with a view of out-telling each other. The flank of fire lit up the base of the trees and gave eerie pops. While I was confident that the other members of the group would love the stories I had for them, it was good mirth until my turn to tell a story came. Thus, to make the seat comfortable, I thought it wise to tell a folklore that I heard concerning the region. Based on this story, in past years there was a man who resided in the forest single-handedly with the name Elias. He was a hypocrite who was isolating himself as the people from the neighboring towns considered him a witch. One night some of the residents of the town felt threatened by him and formed a mob to deal with him. They located his cabin and burnt it with Elias inside the cabin. He cried out to God in terror when he felt his flesh begin to burn, and his flesh was melting to the trees and the ground in the woods as he writhed in pain. They claimed that even though the man's body was buried, his spirit could not rest, and he roamed the forest looking to take vengeance on anyone who would venture into the forest. A gust of wind blew as I was concluding the story. It was as if the wind blew in the cold temperatures, phasing the fire a bit. We stood there for a moment before my friends nervously dismissed the feeling of being watched and continued regaling me with tales of the haunted buildings past. We agreed to let it rest, and each of us went to his or her tent. I got into my sleeping bag and tried to sleep with my ears open for any noises produced in the forest. The sounds characteristic of any other night, such as crickets and owls, were nowhere to be heard. No, what I heard was the rather faint sound of the stomp, stomp, stomp outside of my tent. He continued to tread heavily on the metallic floor, and my heart was pounding hard for me to listen to him. However, the noise ceased. Thinking that it was just a figment of my imagination, I kept my eyes shut and attempted to sleep. But a rustling sound startled me one day, and I woke up. I opened my eyes and tried to focus on the darkness as I sat up. The few remaining logs that were used as fuel had almost settled to ashes, and the fire only glimmered. And then I saw it. A shadow of some man standing near the tent where we pitched our tent and were observing us. I shut my eyes for a second. Perhaps my imagination was just getting the best of me, but when I opened them again, the figure was still standing there, just an outline of shadows. I shouted to my friend. I was very trembling at that time. "Boys, wake up. There is someone outside." My friends, who were still in their tents, struggled to get up out of their sleeping bags, their flashlights pointing toward the ground. But when they directed their lights in the figure's direction, it faded away. We scoured the campsite, but there was no sign of anyone who was not supposed to be there being at the campsite. We felt a huge barrage of fear, and thus stayed close together and awake near the remaining fire which shone faintly. The following day, we closed off the incident, and in an attempt to justify that it never happened, we made ourselves believe that it was all in our imagination. The day was spent walking in the woods, swimming in the lake, and in an attempt to have a good time. However, as soon as the darkness set in, people got scared again. We only agreed to maintain the fire that was put out to lit so that could scare off any intruders. But then, the dark unknown figure was to be seen again as the night advanced further. This time it was more up, close to, hovering at the edge of the firelight. At times we could make out a dim formless shadow, almost human but definitely not one of us. Fears and anxieties were rising, and we discussed where to go if we choose to evacuate the campsite on the same day. But the idea of going out at night through the dark woods was actually as scary. It was now that we all agreed that was the best time to remain alert and guard until it was morning. Seeing the first light of the day returning through the trees, the figure faded out of sight. Husked and drained, we repacked our tent and belongings and got out of the area as soon as possible. The remaining distance back to town was driven in complete silence, each of us apparently very busy with our own reflections. That incident was never recalled. Nevertheless, we could not forget it. I still do not know what we saw to this day. Could it be Elias, as the legend told the people many years ago? Or was it something different, something evil that lived in the woods? That is all I can recall off the happenings that was I during that summer night. The feeling of fear I live with up till this very day. For 1 week annually, and in the summertime, my family and I used to go to our lake house. It was a beautiful, calm place to be, one that relieved the stress of busy city life. The lake house had always belonged to us, and most of the lovely childhood memories associated with it had already been described. But last summer, those memories were covered up by one evil experience with something or someone, I do not know. It was a bright Sunday afternoon when we got to the lake house, and both of us were looking forward to having a fun-filled week. Our house was also the same as I had left. comfortable with beautifully wide windows that give you spectacular views of the lake. We unpacked and settled in for the vacation first, as any tourist would probably do. The first couple of days were heavenly. It did become our day of swimming, fishing, and sun-tanning on the deck. However, the events unfolded differently on the third evening of the customer's stay at the motel. I was sitting in the living room reading a novel when I heard a tapping noise from the kitchen area. At first, I instinctively thought it would be a family member and didn't give it too much consideration. Once I arrived, though, to check on it, the kitchen was abandoned. Confused, I decided to go back to my book, but the knocking was still going on. It became louder and more proclaiming. I looked through the window opening and the doors. All the doors and windows were closed and locked. The murmur appeared to be right inside the house. I felt a bitter feeling crawl up my spine, but dismissed it as instantly as I could. Then, when we were eating dinner sitting at the table, all of us, I could feel the tension in the air. My parents and siblings appeared anxious, and they were repeatedly looking around. I tried to know whether the others also heard tapping, and much to my surprise, the heads of everyone in the car moved in a positive response. We concluded it may have been the old structure of the house adjusting, in an attempt to convince ourselves. Although these sounds which I mentioned above, the noises did not fade away. For the next few days, the knocking was accompanied by other noises, voices at the doorsteps, halls, doors, and corridors, whispers that can be heard from the walls. It was such that all of us could not sleep throughout the night. We were all tense. My youngest sister, Emily, was one of the hardest hit by this. It's not long before she begins to have a disturbance in her sleep, waking up crying in the middle of the night, with claims of having seen a shadow figure in the house. We tried to remain calm and look for a reasonable explanation in all of this that taken a rational point of view. However, one night the tensions got out of hand. Later in the day, we were all in the living room, watching a movie, and suddenly out of the blue, Emily screamed. She gestured towards the hall, swallowing hard and looking scared. Here is it standing right there. Thus turning round, we looked but could not see anything. Emily could not stop crying and said that she saw a dark figure that followed us. Enough was enough. My father had said enough was enough. He quickly lit a flashlight and angrily walked off to the hall, ready to quell whatever was making us so scared. Towards the last door of the hall, the temperature became significantly lower. He stood there and pointed the beam of the flashlight at the void. Then the light was switched off with a snap. Next, we heard a loud noise, and after that Father shouted. We immediately went to him and noticed that he was lying on the floor, and the flashlight that fell from his hands was broken. He was scared, but that would not have stopped him from continuing what he was doing, although in a different manner. He said he sphincter a shot of presence as if something had shoved him. We supported him and went to the living room, shutting ourselves in for the night. Everybody was awake and the sense of danger in the air. The next morning, we got up early and thought to leave the lake house as early as possible. We folded up our things in a hurry, wanting to flee from whatever came into our home. I turned around to have a quick look at the house before pulling out of the parking lot, and a cold feeling went through my body. The lake house, which used to be associated with fun and recreation, had turned into a horror for the family. Since the summer, we have not gone back there. As of now, there stands a much-deserved small beautiful house by the lake which up to this date serves as a reminder of our family. Yet, some things are better left unsaid, and even today, one can still feel the fear from that week that wouldn't leave anyone indifferent. To this day, no one is quite sure what, or who, was hiding in the darkness of the lake house, but the fear of an unknown was very real. From the three experiences, I have come to learn that the deadliest things in life are not necessarily those who are faced, as they are the invisible creatures. Whether I felt it in an unknown man in my house, a strange man near the fire while camping, or a strange fellow in the lake house, the feeling was the same. I was shaking with fear before I slept.